All right, all right. Thank you for watching another book review. This one is about power. And first of all, I want to get into the author, Robert Caro, because this man needs to be read. In my opinion, one of the best biographers of all time, despite only writing about two characters. So the first book, he only did one volume, is called The Power Broker by Robert Moses. I'll probably do a book review on that one. Honestly, I gotta reread it because it's been 10 years or longer actually since I read that one. But then he did a 5 volume series on Lyndon Johnson, who I and apparently Robert Caro, who's in his 90s, is still finishing up as of June 2025 Volume 5 with a typewriter, old school. And this dude, Robert Caro, he moves to the location. So he moved to Hill Country, Texas, where Lyndon Johnson grew up. And he essentially puts himself in character. And this book, this is just the first volume, The Path to Power. His notes the amount of research this man has done for this character. I mean, this is not just a case study on Lyndon Johnson. This is a case study on American politics, which, newsflash, there's a lot of cheating and corruption involved. But look at the bibliography. It's basically like 50 pages here. The book itself is like 780 pages. And the references, I mean, if you want to see every single thing that Robert Caro researched on, this is not a man's opinion. And Caro does an excellent job of keeping his opinion out, which is awesome for a biographer. And in my opinion, I mean, I love Walter Isaacson. Who doesn't? Walter Isaacson tends to idolize the subjects like Elon Musk, and I did a review on the Elon Musk one. Excellent, excellent biographer. I read all of Isaacson's stuff, Doudna, Da Vinci. I haven't read Einstein. I got to read that one. Musk, Jobs. Okay, but he tends to idolize his subjects, and I mean, he tries to show the dark side too. Caro, like, loves the dark side, the dark triad of both Robert Moses, who is a 1,200 page book, and Lyndon Johnson, which is, let's say each book's on average 600 pages, and then he's got 5 of them. The fifth one you can't read yet, but that's like 3,000 pages. So this first one in the 5 volume series is about Lyndon Johnson's childhood, his college years, his time as a congressional aide. Then he became part of the New Youth Authority during FDR's New Deal. Then he became a congressman, and then he runs for Senate. And I mean, there's spoiler. I would say it's spoiler alert, but this is history. It ends when he lost his first Senate race. He would have been the youngest senator ever elected at 32, I believe. And he lost because he made a mistake. And one of Lyndon Johnson's rules was if you want to win, do it all the way through. Do it all the way through the entire part. Don't skip any parts of the process. And he followed that his entire career in this path, in this first volume, except at the very end, he messed up for one day. And if we have time, I'll get into it in this book review. If you don't know much about history, there will be spoilers in here. And look, this book shows you this kept getting recommended to me, and I kept putting it off because I read The Power Broker. I loved that profile on Robert Caro, but it was a slow burn. And the last thing I wanted was a slow burn on Lyndon Johnson, who I knew very little about other than the fact that he was instrumental in civil rights. I didn't realize Lyndon Johnson was like a dark triad type of dude. And he truly is a guy who had really no principles of his own. His only purpose, it seems like at least through volume one, and it ends when he's 32 years old, so maybe he changes as he goes along. I already bought part two, The Means of Ascent. I will get into it later. It seems like he's just obsessed with power, and Robert Caro is also obsessed with power. I mean, his entire career has been focused on writing about people's obsessions with power. So, can greatness be separated from its corruption? There's no doubt Lyndon Johnson was an incredible worker, networker, politician, a genius manipulator, and someone with an ability to play things through to the end, like definitely play chess and not checkers. And he was built for politics. Definitely corrupt, although you don't see the corruption until later on. I mean, it really depends on how you view corruption, right? Trying to steal elections or paying people to vote one way indirectly, which if you doubt that politics is corrupt and that votes or elections when they're not close can't be swayed one way or another, nor that both sides engage in it, but clearly one side more, and that's the party of Lyndon Johnson. And this coming from a registered independent. You need to read this because this shows you like it's blatant. And this was happening almost 100 years ago in the 1930s and 1940s. FDR has a lot of quotes in here. You get not just the biography of Lyndon Johnson, but you get a history of the state of America during that time, during the Great Depressions, how bad, how hard it was for farmers in rural Texas hill country, which is where Lyndon Johnson grew up, isolated and poverty-stricken region. His father, LBJ, Lyndon Johnson's father, was a congressman, and he was known for honesty and integrity. But he was also known for being broke, and at the end of his career, he had nothing to show for it. And at least the way Robert Caro writes it, Sam Johnson wasn't the best father to Lyndon. So as a new father, this resonated with me on many levels. Like you have a lot of influence on how your offsprings turn out based on not just how you are, but how you treat them. And so Lyndon Johnson, you can see from the biography, he admired his father, but watched him remain poor. And he learned as he got older, his father had a lot of principles. And look what that got him. Nothing. And Lyndon Johnson, you can see the way Caro writes it, he knew early on it doesn't really pay to be principled. And Lyndon Johnson's goal was never money. It was power, which he sees himself not just as the one with power and in the limelight, which he was definitely obsessed with that as well, but only as a means to get power. And you can see early in his career during college, he attended the Southwest Texas State Teachers College. I think it's now Texas A&M. Uh, he was craving attention. He always kissed ass to his superiors and treated his subordinates like shit throughout his whole career, at least throughout volume one. He never ran for college president, but he basically created this organization within the college where through manipulation and bending the rules as far as who gets to vote for president was able to win president presidency on behalf of his group of friends, and they were all essentially his subordinates. And he learned early on that you can use strategic charm, but also ingratiate yourselves amongst your superiors. But he demeaned the people below him, manipulated everyone around him. He soon after college got a teaching job, but then he became a congressional aide for a congressman named Richard Clayburgh, who later worked for a guy named Sam Rayburn, who was very instrumental in Lyndon Johnson's career. And as a congressional aide, he gained a lot of DC connections, honed his insider game almost from day one. So there was like what was called an unofficial junior Congress amongst all the congressional aides in Washington, and that they were not actually voting on anything, but they held their own junior Congress type of thing, and they learned how to broker information. So Lyndon Johnson learned early on that information and know-how and networking and manipulation were the way to get to and to impress powerful mentors. And one of those people was Sam Rayburn, who ended up being the Speaker of the House for, I believe it was 17 years, and was almost like a father figure to Lyndon Johnson. But Sam Rayburn was also someone who had a lot of integrity. And well, anyways, after he became a congressional aide, he was appointed to head Texas's new youth authority, which was part of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Franklin Roosevelt was the president at that time. And because of Rayburn, who nominated Lyndon Johnson to FDR to be the head of Texas's new youth authority, he basically became in charge of distributing hundreds of federal jobs. And so he went back to Texas and he was in charge of the new youth authority, which was in charge of hiring youth. And he essentially used his power to build a personal political machine. So he would ingratiate himself with the rich people of Texas, the oil men, and he would get their kids jobs, and then he would know how to funnel funds to different businesses. And he wouldn't, what was interesting about this, he didn't personally profit from any of this. And at least in this entire book, he's not wealth, but he's definitely powerful. And you can see how he grows that power. And this is what I'm waiting to find out if he actually ends up ever personally becoming wealthy. But I think he just saw power as something much more alluring. And his role as the new youth authority head for Texas paved his way for his reputation in brokering information, brokering jobs, and leverage, which, as it turns out, there was a special election in Texas's 10th district after a representative died unexpectedly. So this was 1937, special election. The 10th district of Texas, what is notoriously a underrepresented district. No one really cared about it. It was considered unimportant, but he was supported by Sam Rayburn and the New Deal coalition, and he didn't officially get Franklin Roosevelt's endorsement, but he basically ran his entire campaign on I'm a FDR supporter. And he went, and this man politicked, grassroots campaign, worked his ass off, ranch to ranch throughout the 10th district. He was not a good speaker, and he had really no genuine ideas of his own. He it seems like genuinely no principles of his own, no original thoughts of his own. But he was able to amass power and win that election through who he knew, which became wealthy business people that would fund him, and the fact that he anchored himself to FDR's policies. And even though he didn't actually believe in them, and he would tell um, his wealthy, I guess, political donors that gave him money, hey, I have to say this in order to win, but don't worry, once I'm in, I'll help you out. And he did. You can tell it's hard to actually figure out what he actually believed in. And I don't think he believed in anything, at least throughout volume one personally. I think he just believed in advancing his career by any means necessary. And so once he was a Congress person, he was appointed to the Naval Affairs Committee. He kept trying to get FDR's attention. FDR finally talked to him and said, "Hey, get on the Naval Affairs Committee." The thing that he did, all right, he brought through the Naval Affairs Committee, he brought electrification, housing, and water infrastructure to his district. And he could funnel federal power and jobs and become indispensable in that regard. But he became a top fundraiser for Texas, all the Democrats in Texas. So he courted the oil men, he got military base contracts for his allies and other contractors. Apparently, the way the Democrats were raising funds were not grassroots enough. And so he put himself in a position as a junior congressman with almost no power, really. He put himself, he finagled his way to be the main person for the Democratic Party raising funds for congressmen. And so he would eventually decide who gets funding and who doesn't. And he was basically given carte blanche to do that. And his donors loved it because he assured them, hey, I've already got you contracts. We have this person running for Congress in his district in Pennsylvania, and I know we can get things done. Who do you know there? He was able to raise funds like nobody's business, destroyed anyone else who tried similarly on the Republican side or even in his own party. And so he became the kingmaker, essentially, at least from Congress perspective. And he was not yet a power player himself, but he could deliver that power to others as a junior congressman. That made him essential. And he didn't need seniority, he didn't need capital. He made it work. Uh, After doing that, he a Senate seat actually came up. And this is where the book ends after he loses. So he would have been the youngest senator in a special election. Um, he narrowly loses. So he did everything right. And by right, I mean he cheated. Like, and one of the chapters, I believe it's called Pass the Biscuits Pappy. So it's towards the end. It's like the fourth to the final chapter. It's also the longest chapter in the book. It is, I think, required reading, not just for people interested in politics, but for everyone, because it shows you how, like, if you're a citizen of this country or any country where there's democracy, it's a must read because this was 1940s and they were cheating and they were doing stuff that we have proof of them doing in the 2020s. Paying off judges. If it's a narrow race, you can buy the remaining votes. We'll use dead people. We'll use Mexicans that live in Mexico. We'll bust them over. It's essentially mafia ran in these districts and in the key districts where you're able to do that, where you have corrupt judges who are the ones counting the votes, where you have basically people being forced to vote one way or just paid off and give us your ballots. Um, he essentially did that and was about to win. His one mistake, and this was the spoiler I was worried about, but I'll go ahead and say because it's history. His one mistake was on election day, he was so far ahead of the other guy, and the other guy was Patty, the governor of Texas. And that he had like his own talk show on the radio, so he was like pretty popular dude. O'Daniels, I believe was his name. Um, I believe his name was O'Daniels, but he was able to out cheat everyone else. I don't think O'Daniels cheated directly. So here's the crazy part. O'Daniels, he was a wealthy dude, but he was popular. Back then, being on the radio was like being Joe Rogan. Like, so he was popular, but Lyndon Johnson was also charming and had a lot of influence and was able to cheat and willing to cheat. And so he was up by a lot on election day. O'Daniels was the governor of Texas, and he was very anti-alcohol, and he was about to pass a law in Texas that banned selling alcohol within 10 miles of military bases, something like that. And the powers that be in charge of alcohol and the rich people involved in those industries were getting worried. And they didn't know the score, right? They didn't know, they knew O'Daniels was losing, but they didn't know in what counties, how far he was. And basically, Lyndon Johnson, his one mistake that he made, and he made it only on one day in this entire book. He played it everything perfectly. And by perfect, I don't mean ethically, but in his mind, perfectly. He announced that he was up. He announced which counties he won and by how many votes, instead of keeping that private until the actual results came out. He did it. They were celebrating. The powers that be were then able to see which counties and the exact numbers that they had. And in those counties, those votes don't actually count. Even if they're announced, they don't actually count until a judge signs off on it in every county. So these people were more powerful than Lyndon Johnson. Remember, Lyndon Johnson was just one person and he was only 32 at the time. In the midnight hours, they were able to contact all those judges where Lyndon Johnson's campaign literally stupidly announced how much they won by, but they were not officially counted yet. And those judges were paid off and they knew the exact number they needed and they made it happen. Basically, not because they liked the governor of Texas and wanted him as senator, they just wanted him out as governor of Texas. And they saw that was the best way to do it. Lyndon Johnson knew he fucked up a day later. FDR even told him, he said, "Oh, I think FDR has a funny quote in there when Lyndon Johnson goes back to Congress and he gets a note from one of FDR's people, I want to see Lyndon. Lyndon goes in there, he says, "Man, I had it." FDR jokingly laughs and says, "You learned one of the first rules of politics that I learned early on as well. When you won a county seat, when you won votes in a district or a county or whatever, you got to sit on those ballot boxes until they're officially signed off, meaning don't announce that you won and by how much because they're not official yet. And then you're basically telegraphing to the other side what they need to do in order to win. If he wouldn't have announced anything, they would have had no clue. And they would have had no idea which judges to call and bribe and all that stuff. So because he announced it, they literally knew exactly where they had to go. They did it. FDR is like, yeah, man, you got out corrupted by other people. And the book essentially ends with FDR died um, during his third term. And Sam Rayburn died, who was his hero, who was the um House Speaker, and then it essentially ends that way. Like Lyndon Johnson learned a rough lesson. His idol's dead. FDR, who he remember campaigned that he was like a mini FDR, basically. Like if you're voting for Lyndon, you're voting. This man had no principles of his own. So his whole campaign was you're voting for a Lyndon Johnson clone for your district, or in the case of a senator, for your state. And so now that FDR, but he secretly didn't really care about that. And his his donors were saying, yeah, we don't like New Deal at all. So he didn't have to fake it anymore. Now that FDR is dead, he was able to actually uh, go towards the special interest of his donors, which were Republican business people, not quasi-socialist New Deal people like FDR. So that's where the book ends, where basically Lyndon Johnson just learned a very important lesson of how corrupt Washington is, and it's more corrupt than him. So it sets it, and now he doesn't have to pretend that he's a New Dealer anymore. I don't even like politics. It was super interesting, and it leaves you on a cliffhanger for the next book, which it's only like 420 pages, so it's almost half the size. Volume 2 is almost half the size, and they're both like critically acclaimed, award-winning books. It's almost half the size. Not quite, like two-thirds the size of the volume 1. I'll get into it. Highly recommend. I just told a family member about it who is not interested in politics, but if you're interested in psychology and in power and in manipulation and just if you're naive and actually think that people don't cheat in politics and that judges can't get paid off, there's not people like special interests, this is a rude awakening. If anything else, it's worse today than before, but we'll have to have somebody else write a 5 volume series on Donald Trump or Gavin Newsom or one of these characters, but this is a must read for everyone. Hopefully, this review was not too long. I hope you get a chance to pick it up. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.